I was born for one reason, to take care of my brother. But I had other plans. My parents didn't want another child. They wanted a caretaker. Someone to sacrifice their life for my brother. From the moment I could walk, I was expected to serve him. To give up my toys, my birthdays, my future. And when I told them I was leaving for college, they finally admitted the truth. I was never their child. I was their backup plan. So I did the one thing they never expected. I packed my bags, walked out the door, and never looked back. From the moment I was old enough to understand, I knew I wasn't born out of love. I wasn't a miracle child, a long-awaited blessing, or even an accident. I was a necessity, a backup plan designed to serve a single purpose, to care for my older brother Rick. Rick was 5 years old when I came into the world, and from the very beginning it was clear that my presence wasn't welcomed. Not by him, and not entirely by my parents either. My brother had ADHD, but instead of helping him manage it, my parents enabled his worst behavior. He was loud, aggressive, and demanding, and from the time I could walk, I was expected to adapt to him. I don't have any memories of a time when my parents put me first. If Rick threw a tantrum, they caved. If Rick demanded attention, they gave it to him. And if I ever asked for anything, I was reminded over and over again that Rick was special and needed more than I did. It didn't matter if he snatched my toys or threw my birthday presents across the room in a jealous fit. It was always my responsibility to be understanding, to be patient, to put Rick first. By the time I was in kindergarten, I had learned that fighting back was pointless. If Rick took something from me, my parents would sigh and tell me to let him have it. If he pushed me, they'd tell me he didn't mean it. If he screamed at me, I was told I needed to learn how to deal with his emotions because he was my big brother, and I was his only real friend. But I wasn't his friend. I was his punching bag. Rick had no friends, and it wasn't hard to see why. He was unpredictable, explosive, and controlling. No kid wanted to be around him, so my parents forced me to include him in everything I did. Playdates became unbearable, birthday parties turned into nightmares, and anytime I tried to enjoy myself, I knew it was only a matter of time before Rick would ruin it. At school, I watched other siblings laugh, play, and protect each other. They had inside jokes. They looked out for one another. I had none of that. Rick didn't protect me, he tormented me. And my parents, they let him. One of the worst parts of growing up in our house was the suffocating expectation that I would always be there for Rick. If he needed help, I was supposed to help him. If he needed company, I had to drop what I was doing. If he had a meltdown, I was expected to sacrifice my own happiness to make him feel better. The truth was brutal, but it was inescapable. I had never been a priority. But even then, I didn't realize the full extent of how little I mattered. Not until years later, when my parents revealed the real reason they had me. I wasn't just supposed to be Rick's sibling. I was supposed to be his lifelong caretaker. And the moment I learned that truth, something inside me broke. Growing up, I quickly learned that my needs and feelings would always come second to Rick's. My entire childhood was dictated by his moods, his tantrums, and his demands. If I wanted something, I had to ask quietly, and even then I knew there was a good chance my request would be ignored. But if Rick wanted something, my parents moved heaven and earth to give it to him. Birthdays? Forget about it. My birthdays were his to ruin. One year I asked for a bike. I had been dreaming about it for months, imagining myself racing down the street, the wind in my hair. My parents actually bought me one, and for a brief shining moment I thought maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. But as soon as Rick saw it, he threw a fit. He screamed about how unfair it was, how he deserved a bike too. Instead of standing firm, my parents gave him mine and promised to get me another someday. That day never came. Rick's control over my life extended beyond just toys and birthdays. He dictated everything. If I wanted to watch TV, I had to watch what Rick wanted. If I wanted to go outside and play, I had to include him, even if he made the experience miserable. If I had a friend over, my parents forced me to let Rick join in, whether my friend wanted him there or not. It was exhausting. It was suffocating. The worst part? Rick didn't even like me. He didn't see me as a sibling. He saw me as an inconvenience, an obstacle to his endless need for attention. If he wasn't ignoring me completely, he was making my life hell. He would push me, slap me, even bite me when he didn't get his way. And when I cried, my parents would shake their heads and tell me, You need to be more patient with him. They never defended me. They never told him to stop. They just expected me to endure it because, in their eyes, that was my role. But the moment that truly shattered me, the moment I realized just how little I mattered, came when I turned 13. For years, I had begged my parents to take me to Disneyland. Just me, just for once. I wanted one trip where I could be happy without Rick ruining it. After months of pleading, they finally agreed. They told me they would drop Rick off at my grandparents' house for a few days and we would finally have time together as a family. Without him, it was the first time I had ever been excited about something. But Rick found out. And like always, he made sure I suffered for it. He screamed, cried, and threw things until my parents caved. He threatened to hurt me if I took them away from him. And once again, they chose him over me. They begged me to let him come, saying it was the only way to keep the peace. And just like every other time before, I was forced to sacrifice my happiness for his comfort. Disneyland was ruined. Rick refused to go on any rides. He whined about the crowds. He complained the entire time. After 2 hours, he demanded to go back to the hotel, and my mom took him, leaving me alone with my dad in what was supposed to be my dream trip. That was the day I stopped hoping things would ever change. That was the day I truly understood. I was not my parents' child. I was Rick's caretaker, and I always would be. By the time I was 17, I had reached my absolute breaking point. Years of neglect, manipulation, and forced sacrifices had built up like an unstoppable tidal wave inside me. I was done being my brother's caretaker. I was done watching my parents justify his behavior at my expense. And more than anything, I was done being an afterthought in my own family. College was my escape plan. I had been working on applications in secret, meticulously researching schools far away from home. I didn't just want to leave, I needed to. Every rejection, every ignored plea, every ruined birthday had led me to this moment. I refused to spend my life as a glorified babysitter for a brother who didn't even like me. But when my parents found out, they were furious. "How can you even think about leaving?" my mother hissed, as if I had personally betrayed her. "Rick needs you," my father added, as if I hadn't spent my entire life being forced to put his needs above my own. I expected their anger. What I didn't expect was the truth they had been hiding from me my entire life. The reason they had me, the real reason, was to take care of Rick. They told me everything in one breathless, desperate plea, as if it would change my mind. They had known since Rick was little that he would never be independent, and instead of planning for his future, they had planned for mine to be sacrificed. Their dream was to eventually retire, travel, and hand over full responsibility for my brother to me. I was never meant to have a life of my own. I was furious. I stared at them, my chest heaving, my nails digging into my palms. "So you're telling me," I said, my voice eerily calm, "that you had me just to be Rick's caretaker?" My dad didn't even hesitate. "Yes." For a moment the world stopped. The air was sucked out of the room, the weight of my existence crushing down on me. I had always suspected that I was second place in my family's priorities, but to hear it out loud, to have it confirmed, it broke something inside me. My mother, sensing my devastation, tried to backtrack. "That's not what we meant. Of course we love you, sweetheart." But I didn't believe her. Not anymore. All the late nights spent crying, all the birthdays ruined, all the sacrifices forced on me. It all made sense now. I wasn't their daughter. I was their backup plan. And I was done playing my role. The moment I walked away from that conversation, I knew I would never look at my parents the same way again. Everything I had ever believed about my place in our family had been shattered. I wasn't a child they cherished, I was a contingency plan. A safety net they had built for Rick. But I wasn't going to let them trap me. I doubled down on my college applications, pouring every ounce of my energy into ensuring I had a way out. I applied to every scholarship I could find, sought out part-time jobs, and even reached out to my school counselor for advice. Every time my parents tried to bring up the idea of me staying home, I ignored them. Every time they guilt-tripped me about abandoning Rick, I let their words slide off me like rain. They had already taken so much from me. I wasn't going to let them take my future too. Then the acceptance letter arrived. It was from a school across the country, a place where I could start over. I remember standing in my room, gripping that letter so tightly my hands trembled. This was it. My escape. My freedom. The life I had always been denied was finally within reach. But my parents had one more trick up their sleeve. The moment I told them I had been accepted, their anger turned to threats. They told me if I left, they would cut me off completely. No money, no support, nothing. They made it clear that if I walked out that door, I wouldn't be welcome back. My mother cried, telling me I was being selfish, that family meant sacrifice. My father stood there with his arms crossed, reminding me that Rick needed me more than anyone else ever would. I didn't care anymore. I refused to let them manipulate me into giving up my life for a brother who had never once treated me with kindness. So I made the hardest decision of my life. I called my grandparents. My grandparents had always been distant from my parents, but they had always been kind to me. I explained everything, how my parents had only had me for Rick, how they planned for me to be his full-time caretaker, and how they were threatening to cut me off if I left for college. My grandmother didn't hesitate. "Pack your bags, sweetheart," she said, her voice firm and unwavering. "You're coming to stay with us." And that was it. I waited until my parents left the house. Then I packed everything I could carry and walked out. I didn't leave a note. I didn't tell them goodbye. I just left. The moment my grandmother picked me up, I felt like I could breathe for the first time. I wasn't just running away, I was saving myself. And I was never going back. The first few months away from home felt like a dream. A fragile, delicate thing that could shatter at any moment. But the more time passed, the more I realized that I was finally free. Living with my grandparents was the first time in my life that I felt seen. They didn't expect me to make myself small, or give up my needs for someone else's comfort. They encouraged me, supported my decisions, and made it clear that they were proud of me simply for being me. But freedom came with challenges. My parents had followed through on their threat. They cut me off completely. No financial support, no calls, no emails. It was as if I had never existed to them. The weight of that reality was heavy, but it also gave me something I had never had before: control over my own life. I threw myself into my studies, determined to make it on my own. College wasn't easy. I had to balance classes, work a part-time job, and stretch every dollar I had, but I was determined. I refused to let their abandonment define me. I made friends, built a support system, and for the first time I felt like I had a future worth fighting for. My grandparents helped as much as they could, but I knew their resources were limited. So I applied for every scholarship I could find, took up tutoring, and even worked late-night shifts at a local diner just to keep myself afloat. There were nights when exhaustion pulled me under, where I questioned if I had made the right choice, if walking away had really been worth it. But then I'd remind myself of why I left, of the years I spent as an afterthought, of the moments when my needs were dismissed in favor of Rick's. And suddenly the exhaustion felt worth it. I was becoming someone strong, independent, and unshackled by the past. By the time I reached my final year of college, I had built something for myself. I had a job offer lined up before graduation, a close-knit group of friends, and a sense of self-worth that I had never known before. For the first time in my life, I wasn't Rick's sister or my parents' unwanted burden. I was just me. And that was enough. Life after college was everything I had hoped for and more. With my degree in hand and a great job lined up, I was finally in a position where I didn't just survive, I thrived. My career was taking off, my friends had become my family, and for the first time, I felt like my past no longer defined me. Then out of nowhere my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated for a moment before answering, and when I did, I was met with a voice I hadn't heard in 6 years. My father. For a moment I was too stunned to speak. His voice sounded different, older, more fragile. A wave of emotions crashed over me all at once. Anger, confusion, pain. "I know it's been a long time," he said, his voice cautious. "But we need to talk." I should have hung up. I should have ignored it. But curiosity got the better of me. Against my better judgment, I asked him why he was calling after all these years. And that's when he dropped the bombshell. Rick had been arrested. I felt my stomach drop. My father explained that Rick had been harassing kids in the neighborhood, yelling at them, throwing things, and scaring parents. Someone had finally called the police on him, and now he was facing legal trouble. My parents had bailed him out, but they were desperate. They didn't know what to do next. "We need your help," my dad pleaded. "We're at our wits' end, and we don't know where else to turn." I let out a bitter laugh. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had ignored me for years, cut me off without hesitation, and now they wanted to reach out? Because they needed something? I took a deep breath, my grip tightening around the phone. "Let me get this straight," I said, my voice eerily calm. "You ignored me for 6 years. You let me struggle on my own, made it clear that I wasn't important to you. And now that Rick is in trouble, you suddenly remember I exist." My father sighed. "We made mistakes. We know that. And we're sorry, but nothing," I cut him off. "You didn't reach out because you missed me. You didn't call because you wanted to make things right. You called because you want something from me." There was silence on the other end. "I wasn't wrong. You don't understand," he finally said, his voice breaking slightly. "Rick needs help and we can't do this alone. We don't have the money for his legal fees or therapy. We thought, maybe you could help." My jaw clenched. There it was. The real reason for their call. They didn't just want me back in their lives, they wanted my money. I closed my eyes, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I don't owe you anything," I said. "And I certainly don't owe him anything." My dad tried to protest, but I wasn't interested in hearing it. I had fought too hard to build my life, and I wasn't about to throw it all away for the people who abandoned me. "I'm glad you finally see Rick for who he really is," I told him. "But it's not my job to fix your mistakes." And with that I hung up. For the first time in my life I felt truly free. Weeks passed after that final call, and each day solidified what I had already known. I was free. For so long, I had carried the weight of my family's expectations, their neglect and their betrayal. But now, that weight was gone. The calls had stopped. The desperate texts from my parents begging for financial help had ceased. They finally got the message, and I had never felt lighter. With the silence came clarity. I had spent years chasing something that was never real. The idea of family, the hope that my parents would see me as more than just Rick's keeper. But that had been a fantasy, a lie I had told myself to survive the years of being invisible in my own home. Now there was no more pretending. Instead of dwelling on the past, I focused on what mattered, my present, my future. My job was thriving and I had built a solid career for myself. I was financially secure, something I had worked tirelessly to achieve, knowing that I never had a safety net like most people. And most importantly, I had people who truly cared about me. Friends who had become my real family, a support system I had chosen. And my grandparents. They remained my constant. Their unwavering support, their unconditional love. It was what had saved me. So I made sure to cherish every moment with them. I visited them regularly, making time for long conversations over coffee, laughter over old stories, and quiet moments of peace. They were my family, the only real one I had ever known. But what about Rick? From what I heard through my grandparents, he was still struggling. The court had ordered him into therapy, but no one knew if it would truly help him change. My parents were still trying to hold everything together, but the cracks in their perfect little world had become impossible to ignore. I didn't care. Not anymore. Rick had never been my responsibility. And my parents, they had made their bed, and now they had to lie in it. I refused to let them back into my life, and I had no regrets. For the first time in forever, my future belonged to me. No more guilt. No more shame. No more being a second choice to the brother who had stolen my childhood. I was free, and I intended to live my life on my own terms,